Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talks to Google. I'm Kevin Valk. You're right here. Welcome, Seth MacFarlane, who is the show creator, writer, executive producer, and star of the show. Liz Heldens, executive producer and writer. David A. Goodman, executive producer. Brandon Braga, executive producer. Howard Berger, makeup. And Joseph Porro, wardrobe. So, welcome, everyone. Welcome. So we have some featurettes. But first of all, congrats on season 2 pickup.
Thank you.
So we'll start off really quickly. So Seth, we'll start with you. Just we know what you do on the show, but talk about just the genesis of where this idea came from.
You know, I've always been a huge fan of sci-fi in many different forms, and it had been a while since I had seen something on television that was episodic from start to finish, like The Twilight Zone, like Star Trek, where I was being told a story, a brand new story that had a beginning, middle, and end all on its own on a weekly basis, and I missed that, and I kind of wanted it back because that's what I remember watching, and there's a lot of great serialized sci-fi out there, but there's really nothing that presents you with the new idea of the week. And that was what we were out to do with this show. And at the same time, obviously I come out of comedy. And, the other thing I had not seen was a sort of aggressive casualization of life on board a spaceship where people kind of talk over each other and behave in a not so formal way, as I would imagine is what day-to-day life is like in the actual military. So it's, where there's moments of realism where it's just people behaving like people, where they're not always so buttoned up. So, those were sort of the ingredients that were, I think, foremost in my mind when I was coming up with this idea. Great. And Liz, we'll start with you and go around. But just what are your roles in the film, on the TV series? Sorry.
Oh, I'm a writer.
Okay.
You're an executive producer,
yeah,
too.
I'm executive
producer.
She wrote this episode tonight.
Oh. Episode 109?
Oh, I'm the costume designer. I'm a writer as well.
Writer as well.
And makeup and all the creatures for the shows.
Yeah, so we have a featurette that's going to get us into this. So if we can cue up video 1. Short.
The coolest thing to me that we're doing is we are doing model work.
Seth really wanted a subconscious feel of a real model as opposed to a computer-generated one. We put the best of both worlds together, designed it on the computer, being able to print it out, lit it from within, and then we have this actual object that we can shoot.
It's not bad, right?
No, it's good. You paint some flames on the side, maybe like a rainbow unicorn, you got something.
The more complex shots of the Orville are CGI, but when you see the Orville fly by, or if it's a close shot, or if it doesn't have to do something really acrobatic, those are models. We built an actual model of the Orville. There's something that still feels artificial and cartoonish about a CGI spaceship. Even now, there's nothing that really smells like a model that's real and has been designed by human hands. As a sci-fi nerd, that's probably might be the biggest thrill for me.
I'm sitting right here. I could have just told you that.
Yeah, it was on page 2. So. But no, it's so cool to see models. I actually didn't realize that there were models being used and such practical effects, and it's so cool to see that brought back. It's really like an old, film thing that really is replaced by CGI these days. So that was really important for you to really have in there. So was that take some convincing of executive producers at all to go that route versus the CG?
I mean, it's you can't do it for the entire series. It's too costly. But for things like flybys that you use every week, where it's just establishing shots of the ship, it actually becomes, it's twofold. It becomes economically helpful because you can reuse these same shots, and it just looks, it's actual light hitting an actual surface, which is, it is still, particularly on a television budget, it is still hard to duplicate that. Like those, I mean, and our team does a great job. Like they have fooled me more than once. But I don't know. I had that ILM book when I was a kid, and with all the pictures of all the matte painters and the model designers and the creature designers and the set designers, and knowing that thing is actually real and it's there and you can touch it is. To me, I figured this is probably the last time I'm ever going to be able to do something like this in my career, because everything is going to CGI. So it was a privilege to work with somebody like Rob Legato too, who I've been a fan of for years.
That's so neat. And so for the writers, when did you guys come into the show, and then when you got onto the show, do you guys find yourself kind of backed up against the wall a little bit sometimes, where we want to do this, but it's either not in budget, or we don't have this set up, or how does it work with kind of getting into the production process? No, you answer. And storytelling.
We've worked in TV for a while, so you sort of understand when you're breaking a story what the limits are in terms of what you can do on a television budget. But what you sort of see on this show, I think, is you see people like Joseph and Howard who bring their A game in a way. So you're seeing costumes and you're seeing makeup that you really don't see on other weekly television shows. But yet this show is within the budget of a normal show, and that. Same with our.
This episode was a great example. Those aliens were.
You want to answer it? Is that it? All right.
Well, you weren't answering it correctly. I thought this was a great example of the script did not describe what the aliens looked like, and these guys created something amazing and very memorable, I thought.
Yep. And Liz, how about for you, particularly with this episode? When you were writing it, did you work heavily with Seth on it? How did that work?
We all broke the episode in the room, and then and we pretty much it was a pretty thorough break, and then I just went away and wrote it, and then Seth fixed it, and then now we're here.
I don't have to fix much.
but
we're begging her to come back for season 2.
But I don't feel like in the room that there's ever any. I don't know. Seth creates a pretty, nice space that I don't. I mean, for me, I don't ever feel like limitations. I always feel like the story comes first, the characters come first, and then we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, and what's the lead time for a lot of this? Because it's actually really crazy to see each episode almost get more and more complicated. You have, especially like when the Krill episode was the first time that I really.
This is highly unusual. Every script's written ahead of time. Which
nice.
Rarely happens.
Yeah.
So when we go into production, the scripts have been written and vetted to a thorough degree.
Is that because of the just production time with makeup and costumes and wardrobe and set making and everything?
Actually, it was sort of driven by the fact that Seth wanted to be in the writer's room, and usually a Star Wars show, if you're shooting, he wouldn't have been able to be in the writer's room. So last year we wrote all the scripts, and that gave us a lot of flexibility in terms of laying out the season.
It's also like, again, I haven't worked in hour-long live-action television before, and the idea of shooting something and spending 12 to 14 hours a day and killing yourself to get it done on a TV shooting schedule, and having it be something that you haven't polished to the point at which it's as good as you can, the work is as good as you can do. I don't think I could make it through the day. If knowing, well, this is good enough, now let's all stay here 14 hours filming it. No, you want it to be great. Right,
and so you worked in live action obviously before with Ted and A Million Ways to Die in the West, and now with Family Guy and American Dad. So what did you learn from that previous work that you brought to this that helped you just get through the process a little bit better and easier?
Certainly VFX integration is something that with Ted was, that was the whole movie, was you're working with a character who's not there and you have to shoot the scene with a guy who's not there. So that was certainly a big part of it. But it's also the planning and dealing with a show like Family Guy. It's an animated show, so you don't do coverage. You don't get this shot, then this shot, then this shot. You get the shot that you plan for, and that's it. So that's something coming out of animation and going into visual effects heavy stuff is kind of helpful, because you do have to decide before you even do the work, okay, this is the shot. You're not going to get to cut to something different input, like this is the special effects shot. So it's a lot. It conditions you to, animation conditions you to work, making sure that you're not going to change your mind later on. That you know how to plan scenes.
Gotcha. We were watching that featurette video too for the wardrobe and makeup. So let's take a look at that.
To be able to create so many characters that are tangible, because nowadays there's so much CGI involved in filmmaking and television shows, that we would actually have practical makeups and creatures and puppets and mechanical heads. We were trying to do the count of how many prosthetic makeups we had done, and it's over 5,000. Playing every single day was more exciting than you could ever imagine. When we first started designing things, all I had was the script. The descriptions were different than how the creatures turned out. Bortus had a big evolution. The initial design process was pretty long for Bortus. It was at least a 5-month period. Once Peter Macon was hired, we brought him into K&B and we life cast him so we had his head and we could sculpt on that. And we went through a couple different versions. We never quite hit it. I came down here, set up a little sculpting area, and I just sat and sculpted for like 3 or 4 hours with Seth. And we finally hit on what Bortus's look was. We went ahead and we designed it pretty simple. Peter would come in the morning, and we get him prepped, and there was a cowl, and his face would be exposed, and then we'd glue his chin on, and then he'd have a whole front of the face. What remains Peter is this whole area here, and his eye area. And the pieces are very soft, and they were thin, so he was able to maneuver his face. The first time we had done it, we had him sit in front of the mirror, just move around and do expression, because you have to exaggerate your facial expressions to some degree. And Peter was really great with it. And as a makeup designer, you want that. You don't want to have this giant makeup on somebody and they can't act. He's just such a great actor, and he brought that makeup to life.
Seth, how did you convince Peter to do this? That you're going to come in every day for 14 hours and wear this heavy makeup, or hours?
It was tough, but he's so great, though. He was in for it. You know, he's one of those actors who he understood what the process was, and that's you know, half the battle right there. And that, you know, we do our job in the morning, myself and Tammy Lane and Garrett Immel, and he goes through 2 hours of makeup every day. Probably applied it like 60 or 70 times, I think, through the course of the shoot. And he was always there and let us do our job. And then he went to set and brought it to life, and that takes a lot. You know, he never complained. Was really like the easiest guy to deal with.
That's awesome. Joseph, how about for you with costuming and wardrobes, and what was the most difficult part or the most exciting part also for you when you were creating these costumes and the main design for the flight crew?
Well, the alien stuff they saw in this episode, I can do that in my sleep. The crazy stuff is easy. The uniform, and it's still a work in progress. We're still tweaking it. I don't know if I'll ever be happy with it. Even on season 7, I'll probably be doing something. But that was the biggest challenge for me. And it's just these high-tech fabrics. When you're used to building suits out of wool, which form to the body really beautiful, and then you get a high-tech sneaker fabric, which is actually what they're made out of. We had them all custom made for us in China, these fabrics for these uniforms. So that was I'd say the biggest challenge, and it's an ongoing work. But it's in 8 days for him to pull, and for me to. We have 8 days. That's what we have.
That's
so.
It.
Whoa.
Well,
but not just us. I mean, I'm sure that's every other department too. But what's great about this show, and you guys you can't see this when you watch the episode, is behind the camera is one of the best groups of people I've worked in 35 years. We actually like all our actors. They actually like us. And everyone says, excuse me if you do something, you know, it's just so we all are kind of psyched to go in the morning. We really look forward to getting up at 4:30. Yeah. Enough, anyways.
Well, and that's, I mean, when you were building this crew, and you've worked with a lot of these people before, Liz, David, Brandon, you guys worked together before, right? No?
Brandon and I worked for Brandon on one of the Star Trek,
Okay.
but we'd never worked with Liz before.
Okay.
I worked with Brannon on Next Gen. He doesn't remember me. On season 1, and then I did Salem with him for 3 years.
Okay. And then what were some of your guys' influences, I guess, when you're putting together the show? What, maybe when you were growing up or whatever, when you're designing this and you're coming up with this story and stuff, what influenced you as a kid to, come to this and create this series?
I mean, for me, obviously, I remember watching the stuff that Brannon had written for Star Trek. I mean, there's this great, thoughtful science fiction. But I was also a big fan of the Twilight Zone. I watched things like Night Gallery, like anything I could find where I was being told a story that would keep me up that night. I remember reading this Stephen King story called The Jaunt that I think it was in Skeleton Crew, and it kept me up for like 2 days. Like, this just blew my mind. And that's the kind of stuff that in writing science fiction, that I kind of look for, is that something that just sits with me, like a bad meal. And it's tricky. I mean, I think you and also to make it human, to make it something that feels like it can exist in the real world and is not so exotic that it doesn't take you out of this kind of day-to-day office life that we're also trying to create.
And we're going to go down the line, but who were your influences, Liz, when you were growing up and got you into the career that you do?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that.
Sorry.
I watched Next Generation. I watched Star Trek, and then I kind of put that away and watched, in my 20s, I just watched what everybody else watched. Like, I just watched all the HBO stuff, and then when this job came up, I had forgotten all about Star Trek Next Gen, and then I found it again, and it was great. Yeah. But I don't come from. The work that I've done. the work that I've done as a writer is not like. Is not like genre stuff. Like, I come from Friday Night Lights and super like feely emotional shows.
This has some of that in there.
No, it totally does.
It does.
Yeah.
But I think that's what to me you want in that room. I mean, ideally, you want people in that room who don't come from a sci-fi background as well, who just are fucking great at writing people. And you got to have that.
I'm a designer, so I do files. I'm all through DeviantArt and all these crazy websites, and I'm looking.
What are your favorite drugs?
The truth? The late 60s or, yeah. It's true.
Fair enough. How about for you, Howard?
Yeah, for me, it was, I grew up on monsters and movies, so I grew up with the classic Universal monsters, and then TV was Twilight Zone and Night Gallery, absolutely. The Green Thumb one is the one that got me, when cut off with the end, still scary. But just loved monsters and films, and about 8 years old, I knew I was going to grow up and make monsters for movies, and I just worked towards that my entire life, and this is one of the many great opportunities I've had in my 35-year career now, so that's definitely one of the most fun things I've ever done. Yeah.
Him and I did our first show together, my first show as a designer, first show as makeup, back in the mid-'80s.
Was what?
I was like,
I'm not going to tell you the name of it.
It's called
horrible.
Neon Maniacs. I was 18 years old. Yeah, it's a real, it's great.
But it was.
Yeah, it just came out of Blu-ray.
We go back to 1985.
And David and
I'm going to take your
Brandon.
word for it.
David and Brandon.
I watched 5 hours of television a day, so whatever was on. Every sitcom. I was a big Star Trek fan, huge, giant geek Star Trek fan, but sitcoms were also a big part of what we watched at home, and I became a sitcom writer because of that.
David wrote for the Golden Girls. He won't tell you that.
I don't bring it up because I was also fired by the Golden Girls. So
And Brandon.
Any horror movie I could sneak into as a kid. I liked horror. I was a big horror fan.
Awesome. So audience questions. I'm going to toss around this. What is it? Oh, right here. Here we go.
Google's not stuffy like those other companies.
We throw our microphones.
It's like, yeah, you just can't see my face. I'm not speaking. All right, anyway. First,
Now everyone else is going to want to touch that.
yeah, I know. Thank you so much. This is awesome. We really appreciate it. So you guys do realize that you've made a better Star Trek than all modern Star Trek, right? Like, this is a really, really amazing experience going through. And this is actually the first episode that I've seen. And now I'm going to rush home and like watch everything else. But the question I have is, how did you go about getting network approval to actually get this? Because in my mind, you have to like emit some pheromone from your body to like go to Fox and like get this done. So I'm curious like what that approval looked like. What was the pushback? What did you sort of like, where was that happy medium that you had to reach to get this approved?
You know, it wasn't really that hard. I mean, the Fox in particular was, the way it was communicated to me was they had been trying to find look, Guardians of the Galaxy had been a hit, the resurgence of Star Wars. They've been trying to find a sci-fi show with a comedic element that would work for them, and it's a hard thing to do. And generally it's done in the half-hour format, which I always feel like is part of the problem, because you're already one step removed from reality. And to me the trick was like, all right, they keep leaning into the comedy, and so it's making it hard. If we leaned a little bit more into the drama and let the comedy just be garnish, then maybe that's the answer. But it really wasn't that difficult. I mean, they were excited by the idea. They felt like it was different. They liked that it was episodic because everything is serialized now. And on a network, I think, look, if it's Netflix, if it's Amazon, if it's Hulu, and you're getting everything in one big chunk, and you can binge watch it, then it's great. It's to me getting a little hard. It's hard for me sometimes to invest fully in serialized programming on a network because I got to wait a week. I want to be told an isolated, independent story, Rod Serling style. But it was, I mean, they were excited by the idea from the get-go. Nowadays, at least at Fox, the culture of the people that I work for seems to be, look, we don't know where the industry is going. You don't lose anymore by trying to be different and new and do something that nobody else is doing, so let's try it.
Great. Thank you. Next question? All the way back there. Back row.
Wow,
you got it.
I hit someone in the head.
You can do it. Throw it.
This is very upsetting.
Hi. I was wondering if you'd gotten any kind of input or feedback from people like William Shatner or Patrick Stewart on your show. Like, has there been any reaction from the original Star Trek members or from Star Trek Next Gen? I was a big fan of that show.
I mean, every once in a while, obviously Jonathan Frakes directed on the show. Every once in a while, somebody, Marina Sirtis tweeted. I actually got a tweet from Garrett Wong.
Oh, no.
No, it was very nice. It was very kind. But yeah, no, they've been great. I mean, Robert Duncan McNeil came and directed on the show. There's a lot of people who worked on those series that we have crossed paths with, and it's great. I mean, we're all fans, so it's a cool to be able to actually work with these people.
That's great. Thank you.
I think the next question is right in front of you.
Oh, such disappointment.
Should I stand up? So it seems like a really cool opportunity to create an entire new universe in terms of like characters and world, and all the depth that you can create for multiple seasons, and kind of create Easter eggs and things that are way out there. So what kind of challenges did you find when doing this?
Well, I mean, look, it's Star Trek. Obviously, its model of a spaceship as opposed to a sailing ship is something that emerged from science fiction from the 1930s, from the 1940s. I mean, there were other shows that did that, but they really were the ones that kind of put a memorable stamp on it. And so the tricky thing is like, all right, anything you do that deals with a crew on a spaceship traveling through space, you're working in that territory. And Star Trek and Star Wars have trodden those paths so heavily that it is a challenge. And so my solution was really not to try and twist myself into a pretzel trying to, all right, maybe, trying to do something so exotic and new. I just kind of embraced, all right, this is a bridge of a ship. It's a crew on a spaceship. Let's start there. What can we do that's new from that point? And a lot of it was tone. A lot of it was, the thing of putting the two command chairs next to each other with the captain and the ex-wife instantly turns this into, it's now you're getting into Cheers territory, and that I haven't seen. But it's a fun challenge to try and find, the idea of an all-male species of Bortus, and I haven't seen that before. The idea of the krill being a technologically advanced species that still clings to their religion very, very heavily is something that in this way I hadn't seen before. And it's, it's trying to find new ways to, look, the basis of your series is the universe, and so you should never run out of ideas if you're doing your job right.
Cool. I think we're up here. And we need a new mic.
Does that bump really loud when I slam?
No.
That's awesome. This thing is cool, Google.
We didn't invent it, by the way. We just bought it, right? Yeah, we just bought it.
I wanted to ask David a question, actually, if that's okay.
They are also people in here, yes, you can ask them.
Because you wrote for Futurama, and
I did.
You wrote an episode called Where No Fan Has Gone Before.
I did, thank you.
Which I've heard good things about. I don't know if anyone else here. So you wrote for another sci-fi show with comedy and feels, right? And I was just curious if you could talk about the experience at Orville versus Futurama.
Well, the difference at Orville is thank you for bringing up that credit. Actually, Seth got me the job on Futurama after Family Guy was canceled in its third season, and he called them and got me that. So I owe him that too.
I did not know that. That's awesome.
But the difference on this show is we break the show as a drama. That the stories that we tell are starting from a place of, what are the dramatic elements? When you're breaking a show in animation, you're really much more focused on what's the comedy. And so I think that's the biggest difference. This at the core of this show is much more related to 1 hour drama, even though there are, obviously this is an episode, this episode was a flat out comedy, but in general, that's I think the biggest difference. Otherwise, a lot of similar things is that what's the character story, how are people going to be involved, and giving the audience what they want.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more.
Hi, so I know all of you have been in the industry for a long time, longer than I've been alive. So I guess...
Fuck you. Sorry about that.
You know how to make friends.
On the most basic level, I want to know how you deal with burnout. How you sustain the level of productivity you're able to have in this industry, working in it so long. And I work in entertainment, and I'm doing my own thing, and I experienced burnout working a couple years on a thing. How do you do it?
Only half joking. I don't know. You gotta take a break. I mean, for me, I get really. I know it's coming and it's usually after I've gone a long period. Like if I've gone longer than 8 months or so without a break, I start to get really, really ornery and just a little cranky and a little short with people, and it's not who I am. So I that is always the indication. Okay, you're going into asshole mode. It's time to take a vacation. But it's, you just have to make time, take weekends off.
Working with good people helps too. If there's a lot of really talented people around, you can sort of, doze off and let somebody else do it. And that, I'm saying jokingly, but it is really true on this show. It's a really talented group. And so when you're collaborating with people, many of whom are more talented than you are, it does help keep you from burning out.
You definitely, I think with us on the, makeup, hair, costumes and all that, we just were feeding each other. So even though we would have like 3 a.m. calls, which was always Monday was 3 a.m., and we would still get up and I'd see Joseph, and I'd always curious to see what Joseph's going to wear every day because he wears something different every day. But it would feed us, and we would just play off of each other with Brandon and David and Seth and the cast, and for the makeup department, we're the first people that greet the cast, so we keep the energy high, and that way it starts them off right, and then we're the last people to see them, and we end the day high as well. And then, it's a great day for them, and they look forward to coming back. So it's being with these great people.
Are you actually an early morning person, or is it something that you just had to
No, you know what? I am a morning person, but I've now developed it. That's it. Like I'm up. If I don't have to get up, I'm up at 5 a.m.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's ridiculous. Like I was up at 4:30 this morning. I'm like, okay, what am I going to do now?
No, it's if you were not the greatest guy in the world and so talented, and I didn't love you so much, I would want to fucking kill you.
Thanks, Seth.
And as we wrap up, just very quickly, maybe go around, but what's the biggest lesson you learned from season 1 that you'll take with you to season 2?
I don't know if we're ever truly happy. We always are like, maybe we could have just moved, that's who we are.
That's a very good point.
And that's why we like to get up and work 18-hour days. And there's a high to it. The hard work, we just really like what we do.
Bunch of self-loathing people who are just freaking never.
And most of us are
enough.
divorced. And yeah.
Honestly, for me, I think more than anything else, it's tone. And, I said this earlier, but it's like I've seen a lot of shows that have tried to do the sci-fi comedy thing and crash and burn. And it's the thing that in movies, I think it's a little easier because it's a one-off. It's big and splashy, and you're not being asked to invest in people who aren't always surrounded by amazing special effects. Sometimes you're just standing in a room talking, and it's got to feel real. And if it's too funny, the stakes go away, and if it's too serious, then the show becomes too dark. So for me, it's tone, and I feel like, interestingly, we've leaned in recent episodes a little more into the drama than I thought we would, but it's kind of working. And I follow a lot of feedback online as much as I can. I love hearing what people are saying about the show, and I really do take it to heart. And that seems to be the overall sentiment is like, look, we're buying these stories. We're into these stories. We're buying the sci-fi of it all. You don't have to throw a pie in somebody's face once a page. We'll stay with you, which is great because that's what's fresh about it for me too. And so tone is really the big thing that I've learned a lot about this season.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. Orville is on Fox Thursdays at 9:10 Central. So thanks so much, guys.